Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase, pricing, and availability questions concerning this watch. And today, you will concern yourself with this watch, and I will as well, because it's one of the best you can buy from any brand at any price. Launched in 2012, this is the Breguet Classique 7727, winner of the 2014 Aiguille, effectively Best Picture at the Oscars of Watchmaking. I can tell you that if this said FP Journe on the dial, the world would have lost its mind, but unfortunately it got lost in the shuffle of many Breguet models among many Swatch Group brands. Well, the star shines brightly today, and we're going to unpack everything that makes this watch special and revolutionary. So in terms of the size, white gold, 41 millimeters in diameter, 9.8 millimeters thick, 50.1 from lug tip to lug tip. It's got a 21 millimeter spacing between the lugs. On my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, it wears nicely, though it is broad. That's a characteristic of these Breguet Classique watches, where the lugs are welded on artisanally, but also broad and straight. So I would say if your wrist is my size or larger, game on. So 16 centimeters circumference and up. It is fairly flat, and with a domed bezel, it will slide easily under a cuff. Taking a look down the barrel, you can see just about how much clearance I've got over the top one more time. The strap is high grade. I don't want to dwell on straps or buckles too long, but I do try to tell the whole story. So we have large rectangular symmetrical scale alligator leather, always a very high cut of the animal, high grade, durable, long-lasting, highly sought. This is the good stuff. There's some bolstering to give volume, and then we have a very narrow folded edge with a monotone stitch, semi-gloss finish, calfskin on the bottom, brand new Breguet factory strap, no crimping, no gouging, and we have a deployant clasp, media blasted Breguet surround with polished B and clasp. It is a friction fit system that snaps shut, and then you can see we have screws and bars used to hold the clasp to the strap, and then also the strap to the lugs. So the use of a screw, a bar, and then a set screw on the bottom, ensuring that you won't risk spring bar failure, which I've seen to catastrophic consequence several times. This is the right way to do it. More expensive, but the right way to make a watch. Now, this is what's known as gray gold in the industry. It's a white gold that's white all the way through and never needs to be plated. It's the good stuff. Everyone from Rolex to JLC to Grubel uses this. Also worth mentioning is that what we have here is a great example of a handmade case. You can see the lugs have been welded on and then filed to create a super sharp break between case and lug. And then we've got a cold rolled case, hand finished in a jig. That's how these coinings are created. And then you can see these little indentations right there. Those are little leads for case knives that watchmakers use to disassemble these things. 30 meters water resistant, so it's not remarkable in that regard, but in every other regard, this is a standout. The dial has not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but 6 different types of distinct lathe guilloche, hand laid, the old-fashioned way, with an engine that's probably 3 or 4 times the age of the person operating it. And you can see the dial is made of 18 karat gold, cut on the lathes to create these 6 different patterns, and then silvered. So we do have fired steel Breguet hands for the hours and minutes, as well as fired steel for running seconds and the power reserve indicator. We have these little white gold cabochons outboard of the stylized Roman numerals. So you can see there are actually little applique indices. And then we have this silicon hand, and that's exactly what that is. That is a deep reactive ion etched silicon hand that represents the extraordinary rate of the oscillator. And what you're looking at here is actually the dial side magnetic balance pivot and the capstone atop it. So if you turn this over, you could see the other side featuring the parachute shock protection is the opposite end of the balance staff. So you're looking at a watch that, yes, has 10 hertz operation. So that is 20 beats per second. That's 72,000 vibrations per hour. And you will note that the Breguet secret signatures, which are drawn by hand but applied by a pantograph, they are present and correct. Let's talk about the technology inside this watch. We talked about the handmade case, the hand-cut solid gold dial, but what made this the Aiguille, or best watch of the year in 2014? It is the unique application of technology. So inside of the watch, we have an incredible caliber that is known as the 574DR. Now, what you should know about this is that back when there was a concours de chronométrie that was effectively a accuracy shootout between brands, Breguet, allegedly, and I've now heard this from independent sources, entered this movement. Officially, the highest score ever attained by a movement in that test out of 1,000 was Grubel-Forsey double tourbillon 30 degree. That was 915 points. Allegedly, this beat that. But as an act of good grace and gentlemanly modesty, Breguet entered this movement in a officially non-competing capacity. So it was tested and it was scored, but it wasn't announced officially as an entrant and it wasn't ranked among the final winners. So we were looking at something approaching the most accurate mechanical movement that can be made at any price by any brand. Before we talk about the basic tech specs, let's talk about what makes that possible. So here you see we have Breguet parachute, but this style of steel shock protection spring, which dates back to Abraham Louis Breguet himself, that is not really what's providing the majority of the shock protection. You actually have two different magnets of extraordinary power, one on either side of the balance staff, holding it in place because one magnet is more powerful than the other. Their combined magnetic flux density is something like 1.3 Tesla or 13,000 Gauss. And yes, this watch is entirely immune to magnetism. But because you've got these two capstones and two magnets, and one of them is more powerful, the balance staff is permanently touching one side and it's turning on that capstone, but it's not touching the other magnetic balance pivot because that one is effectively overpowering the other. So it is being pushed down. The result of all this is that you wind up having a balance staff that's only physically in contact with one capstone, effectively halving the friction. So you have that one magnet that's pushing or pulling down the balance staff and the other one that's effectively an air pivot rotating in the ether. The result is that you've got a little bit of movement space for that balance staff to move around if shocked, and that's effectively most of the shock protection. So under a condition of shock, you don't even have hard contact with the spring-loaded capstone. And because you have a silicon hairspring and everything else here is anti-magnetic, the presence of these monstrous magnets doesn't affect the timing in any way. Now I'm going to try to pause it because it's operating at a mile a minute. But if you look closely, you could see the edge of the hairspring. This is effectively the stud holder right here. It is a free-sprung balance. All the timing adjustments are done with those screws in the recessed aerodynamic balance. Then you can see that there is a escape wheel underneath that is, let me see if I can get it to focus on that. There is an escape wheel underneath that is a lattice of silicon, and then there is an anchor that is made of silicon. And it actually does use conventional ruby pallet stones in this silicon escapement, so that's worth mentioning. A lot of super high rate silicon escapements I've seen, and escapements generally, do use ruby pallet stones. For some reason, I haven't seen a lot of super high oscillation rate full silicon escapements, but this thing reduces the need for lubrication and makes the whole assembly completely anti-magnetic. So you have this partially floating balance with a physical pivot contact only on one side. And as a result, this watch was rated from the factory no worse than -1 + 3 seconds, but it's actually much better than that in practice. And even more impressive is through the 6-position adjustment, we'll fire that back up again, through the 6-position adjustment, the variation between positions extrapolated over 24 hours was no worse than -2 + 4, which is much more impressive than an overall 6-position rate of -1 + 3. That's just the watchmaker's craft. Now, other specs, very interesting. Despite the high rate, it has a 60-hour power reserve, and it is free-sprung, 6-position adjusted, 45 joules. It has power reserve indicator, 72,000 vibration per hour, anti-magnetic escapement, anti-magnetic silicon hairspring. You've got the power reserve indicator on the dial side. It does have stop seconds. It is an incredible feat of micromechanical engineering. Now, I'm going to say it's very nicely finished. Is it as elaborate as, say, I don't know, Romain Gaultier or Kari Voutilainen, or even some of the very top level Breguet pieces that are highly complicated and cost six figures. No, it's not quite on that level. I would say it's maybe a 7 out of 10 in terms of decoration, meaning it has extensive hand finishing, though there are clearly automated process involved. And those processes are probably involved at the first pass on the bridges, if not the entire bevel, which is rounded and mirrored but very narrow. I know sister company Blancpain has a way to execute these bevels without total hand finishing. They've found a way to automate this, and I wouldn't be shocked if the same process is used here. The stripes are very nicely laid, and you can see that they do have a little bit of a shading gradient from one side to the other, which is a good sign. You have polished bevels within all of the screw countersinks, and you can see screw heads are black polished with chamfered slots in circumference. You can see that the ratchet wheel and the train in winding and power delivery, a combination of satination on wheels, and then on the top wheels, which are visible above the bridges, you do have solarization, which is always a great look. A really good-looking movement with a large size, over 31 millimeters in diameter. And you can see some engine turning on the bridges as well as the base plate that looks great. You can also see the locating pins for the parachute shock protection have been polished on their top. This is an extraordinarily sophisticated watch. Again, just the fact that you have such an anti-magnetic watch that you can have 13,000 Gauss of magnetic flux density inside the watch to no ill effect. And that single-sided floating pivot, by virtue of magnets, is the stuff dreams are made of. This is the most technically sophisticated mechanical watch you can buy. And it's not going to cost you anywhere near what a Black Label Chronomet Optimum will. Highly recommended if you can. There is enough artisanal craft in the movement, in the case fashioning, in the dial fabrication, that you don't need the most extravagantly hand-finished watch. What this watch makes up in those last few absolute points of decoration, what it lacks there, it makes up in tech specs. This is an incredible timepiece. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.